I'm truly honored to introduce the final keynote speaker of the inaugural Frankfurt Forum, the European Commissioner for the Economy, Paolo Gentiloni. Commissioner Gentiloni has been in his current role since 2019, leading the Commission's work on a lot of the key issues that we touched upon today, including deepening the economic and monetary union, economic governance reform, as well as sustainable development and the green transition. I think as many of you know, Commissioner Gentiloni also was Italy's Prime Minister from 2016 to 2018. And before that, he was Italy's Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. He's joining us today virtually from Brussels. And I invite you to direct your attention to the screen above me. He will offer brief keynote remarks to kick us off, and then CNBC's Annette Weisbach will moderate a Q&A with him. So thank you so much for joining us again. And Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ole. Pleasure to join you. And unfortunately only virtually. This is Wednesday, day of college here in Brussels. Of course, we all know that the EU and US relations are deep relation with strong ties. And after the Second World War, we always, in difficult times, we were able to stand side by side. So again, since February, we have come together to impose unprecedented sanctions against Russia, to provide crucial military and financial assistance to Ukraine, and to weaken Russia's grip on our energy markets. Is our common response working? In my view, definitely yes. The sanctions are eating away at Russia's economy, which is set to shrink markedly both this year and next year. Russia's own Federal Labor Service has stated that 3,000 brands have put business on hold since the invasion, with 500 foreign companies having been liquidated by the end of July, 500. Russia's imports from the EU fell by around 50% in the period March-June. Russia's imports of IT equipment have tumbled, despite its legalization of parallel imports. Blocked access to updates of Western software, essential spare parts and semiconductors are having a grinding effect on industry. Many of the few cars produced in Russia, data over the summer indicated that sales were down by more than 70% compared to the previous year. Most of these few cars are without airbags and catalytic converters. Russia's share on EU gas imports has fallen by 2/3, from 45% before the war to 14% now. And its share of our pipeline gas imports has fallen by 3/4, from 40% to 9%. The deals that we have struck with the US and other partners to boost energy imports have made up for the cuts in Russian fossil fuels. I am mentioning these figures because I think we need always to repeat how successful was our common effort to respond to the Russian invasion with economic sanctions. And now the cap on the price of Russian oil exports that was agreed in principle at G7 level and was mentioned in the previous panel will put downward pressure on global energy prices and reduce the Kremlin's ability to fund the war. And today we are setting out the legal basis to implement these key measures in the EU. So overall, our common response is working. And I have to say that Russia's recent moves, from halting gas deliveries to the mobilization of the reservists and sham referendum are clear signs of weakness and growing desperation. Of course, they are also signs of escalation, to which we are responding with other packages, the eighth sanction package that was just announced by President von der Leyen here in Brussels. On the economy, it's clear that the consequences of the war are weighing on economic prospects on both sides of the Atlantic. A combination of high energy price, high inflation, monetary tightening, and uncertainty are putting a damper on growth. Both EU and US will see positive growth for the year 22 as a whole, but all the signs are there of a slowdown, and a recession can no longer be ruled out. We are entering the phases of stagnation and possible recession. So to ensure to navigate in this troubled water, we need to maintain our responsive fiscal policies and at the same time our efforts of investments. For Europe, Next Generation EU remains the strongest common tool at disposal, and this is why I have made clear that while we are open to discussing limited and specific points, there should be no wholesale reopening of plans of recovery or postponing of key commitments. In this context, let me conclude these remarks with three lessons or priorities for the future of our transatlantic relations. First, of course, our strength lies in our unity. Within the EU, and you know how challenging it is to keep our unity with our like-minded partners across the Atlantic and beyond. In the months ahead, this unity will be tested again and again, and we must stay the course. Second, in an increasingly multipolar world, the EU and US must continue to work together every day, and not just in times of crisis, to show that liberal democracies can deliver sustainable and inclusive growth. And this is happening. I think that the arrival of the Biden administration marked a qualitative improvement in these multilateral relations. Our agendas are very much aligned. In Europe, we are pursuing an ambitious path of investments and reform to deliver on the triple transition, the green, the digital, and the social. I think that the Inflation Reduction Act in the US goes in a similar direction. As you know, we are also looking more broadly on how our fiscal rules can better support investments in crucial areas while making sure debt level remains sustainable. And we will present our proposal in this next month. Going forward, there is also scope to strengthen our trade cooperation, knowing that the disruption to global supply chain must galvanize us to build safer, more resilient supply chains, especially in strategic sectors. But this doesn't mean in any sense going to protections. Third and last lesson, transatlantic cooperation is necessary but not sufficient condition to tackle the challenges ahead of us. For that, we need to muster much wider coalitions. Russia has openly challenged the rule-based international order. This is not a Western order. It's an order that is in everyone's interest to uphold. Yet 35 countries, as you know, including 3 members of the G20, decided to abstain in the UN resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So we have to increase our reach out and influence in other parts of the world. This is the key objective for the EU of the Global Gateway Strategy to mobilize €300 in investments across the world, in line with the G7 Partnership for Global Infrastructure. We also need to work for a more effective multilateralism. The great example that we have now to implement is last year's global agreement to reform global corporate taxation. An agreement that was made possible because everyone worked in a spirit of compromise to find a common solution. I am confident that this spirit will lead to this spirit is alive and can guide us in meeting the common challenges we face. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm happy to answer to your questions.
Commissioner Gentiloni, thank you very much for your deliberations. Let me first of all ask you about what happened today in Brussels, because clearly President von der Leyen has presented a new round of sanctions, a package, and also news on potential oil price caps. Because perhaps you can give us the latest, what's discussed in Brussels.
Yes, indeed, we are working on the eighth package of sanctions. The main aspects of this package of sanctions are probably three. First, we will increase our listing of Russian persons or entities. We are now at 1,025 persons and 70 Russian entities. And this is the first part. The second part will be increasing of trade limits towards Russia. And the third one that I heard mentioned in the previous panel is the agreement at G7 level on the price cap on oil. Of course, this means that we will work especially on the sector of shipment insurance to make sure that there is an agreement to avoid contracts if oil is transported at a higher price in relation to the cap that we will establish at G7 level. As always, the decision making in the European Union is a process. We don't have executive orders, but I am quite confident that again this new package of sanctions will be supported by member states and will enter into force.
What do you think, when will those price caps, also for the energy of electricity and gas market, will get implemented, and so consumer will finally benefit from it, because we're heading into the winter period?
Well, of course, we worked a lot in the previous months, and indeed I was mentioning some figures in my remarks also to remind myself and everyone how much we were able to achieve in these few months. If you look to the fact that we go from 40 to 9%, and maybe we are now even less than 9% of our gas coming from Russia, this is quite substantial. You know that we have very high level of storage. We are working on mandatory savings among member states, of course, with different ways of reaching these mandatory targets. And next Friday, the Council of Ministers of Energy will address also not only these issues, the issue of a solidarity contribution, the so-called price limits for inframarginal sources, and also the issue of a price cap on gas. I'm sure that this discussion will be, as always, with different opinions, but I'm confident that Friday will put the basis for a final agreement in October in the European Council to introduce a limitation of price for gas. My final remark is we should, I think, avoid raise an expectation of the fact that this price limits will automatically bring energy prices to the pre-war situation. It will be a gradual process, but it's very important to start this process of limiting these prices.
Let me also ask you about the cooperation between Europe and the EU and the United States, because clearly we are here at the Atlantic Council. So how is cooperation going, and how confident are you that perhaps there might be more LNG deliveries from the US into Europe?
Well, we had a very important agreement. President Biden and President von der Leyen a few months ago agreed on supply of LNG. Of course, when we refer to capping prices of gas, we are referring mainly to gas reaching the European Union through pipelines. And of course, we are not putting at the same level Russia and Norway or Algeria or Azerbaijan, because of course with Russia we have a double intention to keep the prices, to limit the prices, but also to undermine the war machine of Russia. Different is the situation for LNG, where we will cooperate with our partners and with the US, both on supply and possibly on making the differences of prices for European and Asian markets less less dangerous than the one that we are seeing now. By the way, this difference between the Asian and the European market on LNG is changing month after month. So I think we have to address this issue with our partners. This is a different story from the capping of gas coming from the pipelines.
Aside from that energy crisis we're currently facing, there has been also political developments in the EU, which at least is interesting also for an international audience. The election outcome in Italy. I know you are also from Italy, so it might be a bit tricky for you to answer that question, but I at least try and ask it. So what do you think will be the ramifications from the outcome of the elections in Italy?
Well, of course, I have a conflict of interest, so I have to answer to your question as European Commissioner,
Yes.
not as a former Italian politician. As European Commissioner, I would simply say that we are, of course, ready to cooperate with all governments, including the coming Italian government. And of course, I could add that, as the Latin motto goes, pacta sunt servanda. So we have a very important cooperation on the recovery, and we have our common rules. You know that these common rules, by the way, are under review and discussion, and what we ask to all European member states is to give their contribution, to have their view, but to stay to the facts that are ruling our union. And I'm confident that this will be the case also for Italy, and we are ready to cooperate, provided that we have all clear that the treaties facts are